Hey, so real quickly, Myths and Legends was nominated for a Webby. It's for Best Podcast Writing. I am super excited about it, and we need your vote. So whenever you get a moment, please go to vote.mythpodcast.com. That's vote, V-O-T-E, .mythpodcast.com, and it'll take you right to the page. Thanks so much. Oh, and there's a quick content warning this week. It's just some more violence. Go to mythpodcast.com for more info on that. This week, on Myths and Legends, we're finishing the Reynard stories. You'll see how lying is the cause of, and solution to, all of Reynard's problems. And you'll see why you'll want to stay hydrated for sporting events. You'll never know what you'll use that water for. The creature this time could be sitting right next to you. And if that's the case, you're going to want to find them some earplugs. This is Myths and Legends, episode 105B. Ferocious Mr. Fox. This is a podcast where I tell stories from mythology and folklore. Some are incredibly popular stories you think you know, but with surprising origins. Others are stories that might be new to you, but are definitely worth a listen. Today's episode is brought to you by Breach. A podcast team started looking into the biggest hack in history, and they ended up in the middle of the story. A mysterious voicemail, disappearing files. It got personal. Breach is a new podcast that takes you inside the world's biggest hacks. They set out to answer questions about the hack of a huge American company, and they found themselves investigating a Russian conspiracy. Subscribe to Breach, B-R-E-A-C-H, in your podcast app right now. Previously on the podcast, Reynard the Fox did a lot of horrible stuff and got himself in trouble, making eternal enemies with Bruin the Bear and Isengrim the Wolf. He then lied to the king and got himself knighted, only to throw it all away by murdering the rabbit, Kuart, who was helping him get started on a mandatory pilgrimage to the Pope. Is something wrong? Did I just hear Kuart scream? Bellowed Bellin the ram from outside Wicked Hole. Yeah, he did, Reynard called back from inside the tunnels. My wife fainted, and Kuart just barely caught her. Hey, Bellin, this is probably going to take a while. Feel free to head back to the king's court without me. Bellin asked about the hare. Would Kuart be coming too? Reynard said he'd ask. He paused for a moment. No, Kuart said go on without him. He wanted to stay here and help Reynard's wife. Bellin agreed, but Reynard stopped him. Reynard had a couple of letters for the ram to take back to the king. They were just some poetry and praise for the lion leader. Would Bellin mind dropping them off? Bellin shrugged. Reynard was basically a knight now, the definition of an honorable animal. Sure. Reynard jogged them out in Kuart's satchel and hung them on the ram's neck. Reynard knew the ram, despite being a priest, had trouble reading and even more trouble writing. He told Bellin that if he wanted to say he helped compose the letter and get a little honor for himself from the king, Reynard was cool with that. He said goodbye to the ram, and Bellin bounced eagerly back to court. It's a message from Reynard, the ram bleated as one of the court servants took the satchel from his neck, and I helped compose it. The king opened the bag and staggered backward. You helped compose this? He asked. The ram, again, nodded proudly. The king stood and commanded that the ram leave his sight immediately. Confused, Bellin exited the hall. Release Bruin the bear and Isengrim the wolf from the dungeons. The king charged the nearest servant. Tell them that they're pardoned of all crimes. As a recompense, they can hunt. Now, the servant was confused. Didn't the king just publicly condemn the bear and the wolf for treason like 3 or 4 days ago? The king tossed the bag to the servant, who recoiled and dropped it. The head of Kuart the hare rolled out of his own satchel. Bellin was down by the stream an hour later, talking to the other animals, and confused that he wasn't honored for the letters that he helped write. When 2 shadows appeared behind him, Broom was the first to draw blood with his bony claw, and the other animals fled as Bellin the ram bleated in terror. Isengrim leapt in and ripped at his neck. Bellin fought, and Bellin died. The other animals ran to the king, saying that Bruin and Isengrim had murdered Bellin in cold blood and that they should be arrested immediately. But the king shook his head. He told Bruin and Isengrim to go after the ram. In fact, for the rest of time, the descendants of the bear and the wolf would hunt the descendants of the ram for Bellin's treachery and murder of the hare. Reynard was next, too. Bruin and Isengrim had the king's authority to kill him and his children on sight. Meanwhile, Reynard, with a nice fat rabbit to eat, decided to hole up in Wicked Hole and wait for the heat to die down. Eventually, Bruin and Isengrim grew tired of waiting outside, and they returned home, shouting threats that the next time they saw the fox, he was dead. The lion who was a king rolled his eyes. Yes, he was aware that he had sent out a proclamation to the entire kingdom that the fox was an honorable knight. That was a mistake. The situation changed almost immediately after the proclamation went out. Couldn't they just have one feast without people coming up and complaining about Reynard? But Lopriel, the now one-eared rabbit, complained all the same. He said he had met Reynard walking on the road in pilgrim's clothes. Lopriel had said hi, but the fox was less than charitable when he tripped the rabbit and tried to pull his head off by the ears. It was only by his quick thinking and high tolerance for pain that Lopriel was able to get out of the situation, but he'd lost an ear to Reynard's claws. The king sighed and started to respond, before he was interrupted by Corbin the crow. He said that Reynard the fox had to answer for the death of his wife. The king rested his forehead on a paw. Reynard had to answer for a lot of stuff. What happened to your wife? The crow explained that he was out with his wife looking for food and saw this fox laying on the road, and they thought to themselves, hey, awesome, free dead fox. The crow shook his head. The court would never guess what happened next. The king pursed his lips. The fox wasn't dead? The fox wasn't dead, called the crow. Reynard bit the wife's head off and devoured her right there in the middle of the road. The king pounded on the table and roared. He was tired of this fox. That was when the queen spoke up. What was the king going to do? He had tried to send people the last time, but look what happened to them. She motioned to the bear with the skinless head and the wolf who was missing most of his feet. The king growled. His reputation was on the line. This time, he couldn't request that the fox appear in court. He had to go to the fox, not by himself, but with an army. The king shouted to his lords and knights. In 6 days, they would besiege Wicked Hole. In 6 days, they would wage war on Reynard the fox. Unfortunately, 6 days was 6 days, and the very next day, Reynard stood before the king. Grimbart, his badger nephew, had rushed to him immediately and told him of the king's decree. Reynard volunteered to come to the king's court to clear things up, and hours later, he was bowing low before the ruler and telling his side of the story. Reynard told the king that he had actually met with his attorney before coming here. She was an ape. She worked in Rome, very serious simian, and she had told Reynard to tell the truth. The truth will set him free. If that didn't work, well, the ape's cousin was actually a mistress of a high-ranking cardinal in Rome, and so he had some pull to get the Pope's curse pulled down on the entirety of the lion's kingdom if things didn't go Reynard's way. Reynard cleared his throat and began with the hare. He didn't attack the hare on the road. He invited the guy in for some bread. It was Friday. Reynard didn't even eat meat on Fridays. The hare was invited to enjoy his buttered bread. But he set the last corner down. Wicked Hole, Reynard's home, was full of Reynard's hungry babies, and the youngest waddled to the table and tried to snatch the bread. Well, Lopriel the hare, not wanting his corner of bread going to feed a hungry baby, had slapped the baby in the face. The baby started crying and bleeding, and then he fainted. As you can imagine, after watching a baby get slapped in the face, Reynard's other children leapt onto the hare, and it was only because of Reynard that the hare survived. How did the hare repay his kindness? By punching a baby. Lopriel is the one who should be on trial. And as for the crow, Reynard had found the crow mourning his late wife. She had eaten so many worms that they got lodged in her throat and actually ate her throat all the way through. The king couldn't even argue that either. That's in the Bible, the eaten by worms thing. King Herod look it up. The hare and the crow exchanged a glance. They had heard of what happened to Isengrim and Bruin, and Bellin and the cat, and basically everyone who went up against Reynard once the fox got talking. They quietly slipped from the feast as fast as they could. The king sighed. Well, the accusers were gone, so he guessed that was over. There was still one thing that bugged the lion who was a king. The money. The lost treasure. That was a lie, wasn't it? Reynard asked if the king had started to look for it, but he got cut off with a startling roar. The king was through with these lies, and he was through with Reynard. Reynard, finally, was speechless. We'll see which animal comes to Reynard's rescue this time, but that will be right after this. That was when Aunt Rukinal stepped in. Reynard, of course, had lied about meeting his ape lawyer on the road, but that was only because he knew his ape lawyer was there in court. Rukinal, his aunt, was a she-ape, and among the best ape legal minds of her generation. She stepped forward on behalf of her client and nephew, saying that while it was not against the law, it was absolutely in poor taste for the lion who was a king to rule on the case in anger. The lion laughed at her. Reynard didn't have friends. Anyone who helped him regretted it. She ignored him and continued blasting the king with not just legal precedent, but also some Seneca and some Bible verses. Basically all the major Bible verses about judging, like the plank in the eye, the judge not lest ye be judged. She even brought out the big guns and dropped the let the lion who is without sin cast the first stone. For her big finale, Rukinal broke out some parables of her own and launched right into story time. There was once a man who walked by a snake caught in a trap. The snake pleaded with the man to let him out, but the man was pretty suspicious. How did he know the snake wouldn't kill and eat him? The snake promised that he wouldn't hurt the man, his eyes appearing sincere. The man shrugged. When has trusting the promises of a talking snake ever not worked out for a human being? He let the snake out of the trap, and immediately, the snake wrapped him up. The snake admitted that the whole ordeal had made him pretty hungry, and his hunger nullified their agreement, so he was, in fact, going to go ahead and eat the man. The man, of course, croaked that that wasn't how promises worked, but the snake squeezed harder. The man then demanded an appeal. 3 creatures. If they agreed, then the snake could eat him. If not, the snake would have to let him go. With a roll of his eyes, the snake conceded. Sure. He promised he would let the man go if that was the case. The first creatures were a raven father and son, who said, yeah, hunger trumped an agreement, even if you knew about the hunger when making the agreement. Also let them know when the snake killed the guy. They wanted a piece of that action. The next 2 animals were a bear and a wolf. They, too, agreed with the snake. That hunger trumped all. The man croaked that it was really unfair to only ask hungry animals on the road, and so he demanded an appeal to the king himself. Wait, the lion who was a king broke in. This sounds familiar. Yeah, the ape agreed, because you couldn't answer the question. Though Reynard could. He tricked the serpent back into the trap and left it in the hands of the man who, with all the necessary knowledge of the animal kingdom legal precedents, decided to not rescue the serpent. The king appeared wise, and that was because of Reynard. The ape smiled. The king needed Reynard more than he knew. He wanted to be a Solomon, but some questions didn't have easy answers. Some justice was messy, and he needed minds like Reynard's. Minds that were so used to lying, obfuscating, and shielding himself from consequences that doing so from a king was like a leisure time puzzle. Reynard protects the king's honor, but what about the bear and the wolf? The 2 creatures the king just made lords. The rulers and the rich squeeze the creatures beneath them, and those at the bottom, like the fox, do what it takes to survive. The king's prosecuting Reynard for stealing grain, but he's rewarding his own greedy lords for stealing cows and farms and lives. As for not having friends, Rukinal had anticipated that argument as well. She called forth the beaver, weasel, squirrel, polecat, ferret, mongoose, otter, donkey, bat, water rat, and more. In the end, 40 animals came to vouch for Reynard's character. To close, the ape asserted that the king had to give Reynard time to craft a defense. Before the king could roar back at her, his leopard lawyers tapped him on the shoulder. The optics of this weren't good. He needed to give the fox a chance to defend himself. Otherwise, it looked like he was just ruling by brute force, not laws or precedent. If they did that, the kingdom could descend into violence and chaos. Regaining his composure, the king cleared his throat. He said he was so upset by Court the Hare's death that he just lost it. He apologized. He gave the floor to Reynard. Reynard staggered backwards. What? Court was dead? Where was Bell in the Ram? What did he bring the king? Now the king was really confused. He told Reynard about the hare's head in a bag. The fox cried out. He had trusted Court with 3 treasures to take back to the king, in gratitude for the lion saving Reynard's life. There was a priceless jewel, a magic ring where the one who wore it would never be harmed, and a mirror that saw all and told fun stories. What had happened to Court between Wicked Hole and the king's court? And, more importantly, what happened to those treasures? Reynard raged before the court, saying that he would find the person responsible for Court the Hare's murder and bring that animal to justice. He then reminded the king of a time when the king, then just a prince, was out walking and came across Reynard and Isengrim when the pair had just killed a pig. He and the queen said they were hungry. They wanted Reynard and Isengrim to hunt other animals for them, to kill other animals for them. The king chuckled nervously. All right, Reynard, shut up. Let's get back to the question at hand. Looks like Reynard and his ape lawyer were right. The king didn't have any evidence beyond what Reynard had told him. Bellin and Court the Hare were dead, so they couldn't speak for themselves, and the other rabbit and the crow had both fled. And if Reynard immediately shut up about the time the king wanted him to kill other animals, he could forget the lost treasure thing too. Reynard thanked the king and told the lion that he would look long and hard for the treasures that Bellin had stolen and apparently hid. That was when they heard a snarl from the back. It was Isengrim, clicking forward on his bony wolf paws. Seriously? Seriously? The wolf barked. The king clenched his jaw. Isengrim was speaking out of turn, and there were good, legal reasons why Reynard should go free. The wolf was nonplussed. There was always a reason with this one. He bent the law to his will. He warped it to get himself out of trouble, and then ignored it when he was free. It was unconscionable. Reynard was a liar, a thief, and a murderer. Isengrim narrowed his eyes and snarled. Reynard was a rapist, too. Oh, come on, I was helping her, Reynard spat out. Isengrim turned to the king and told of a day, a cold day, when Reynard had come to their hole, offering to teach his wife how to catch fish with her tail. All she had to do was stand in the ice and wait. Tempted with more fish than they knew what to do with, Isengrim encouraged his wife to go with Reynard and learn this new technique. Not long after, Isengrim took a walk by the river. It was there that he saw Reynard taking advantage of his wife, whose legs were frozen in the ice. All these years, Reynard maintained that he knew she was frozen. He had warned her against that. What Isengrim saw was him pushing and trying to get her free from the ice. Isengrim raged. He was doing it again. He called his wife as a witness, but she neither confirmed nor denied either of the stories, instead mentioning a time Reynard had trapped her in a bucket. The king threw up his paws. Once again, it was Isengrim's word against Reynard's, and once again, Reynard had made a good case. The king couldn't really do anything. Isengrim stepped forward. The king and the legal system couldn't do anything, but the wolf could. He challenged the fox to a duel, here before the entire kingdom. The king shrugged. This was one way out of his Reynard problems, he thought, as he looked at the wolf, who was multiple times the fox's size. This could work. All eyes were on Reynard, as the fox swallowed hard and accepted the challenge. Then he grinned. He had been hoping for a chance like this for years. A chance to show everyone just how weak little Isengrim was. The king accepted their pledges and announced that the fight would take place the following day. Bruin the bear and Tybert the cat would be the backup team for the wolf, and Grimbart the badger and the ape would be the backup team for Reynard. As he left, Reynard sighed. After all that work, all that talking, he still was going to face his death. Reynard knew the wolf was stronger. He also knew that if he fought the wolf, as he had just pledged to do, he would die. Everyone stood mouth agape the next day at dawn when Reynard arrived at the battleground. The wolf had showed moments earlier, but all eyes were on the fox. His ears were pinned down close to his body, and his body, well, that was shaved. It was completely bare, like the skin of a human. The king blurted out what everyone was thinking. This wasn't a good look for the fox, but the fox replied that neither was death, so yeah. Leopard and the lynx sat on the high, tennis umpire-like chairs and announced the duel. Isengrim hadn't taken any precautions. He didn't need to. He had Reynard right where he wanted the fox, and he would enjoy tearing him to pieces. Both animals put their paws in the Bible and swore that the other was a lying, thieving traitor, and they took their positions at the opposite halves of the circle. The ape was the last one to leave the ring, admonishing Reynard to remember what they talked about. When she exited, the fight began. The wolf lunged at the fox to pin him down on the ground and bite him a bit. He was going to take his time. He actually liked that the fox was shaved. He would be able to see what he was doing to the creature. In a couple quick bounds, he was across the circle and on top of Reynard, but only for a second. Reynard slipped from his grasp, leaving the wolf looking down at his bony, painful paws. Were they greasy? Did the fox grease himself for the fight? While Isengrim stared confused at his slick paws, Reynard found just enough time to urinate. Isengrim took one step toward the fox, then decided to let this happen. If the fox wanted to urinate on his formerly fluffy tail, that only made the wolf look better. When the fox was finished, the wolf went in for the kill. This was the moment he was waiting for. This was the moment that he would kill Reynard. This was the moment that he would take a urine-soaked tail to the eyes. With a wet slap, Isengrim had to stop his assault. His eyes burned from the urine. He whimpered, and Reynard took the opportunity to double down. He kicked up rocks and dust from the ground, and, sticking to the burning urine in his eyes, the wolf was temporarily completely blind. The fox leapt and tore at the wolf's unprotected neck 3 times, before the wolf recovered enough sight to stop him. Panting, bleeding, and half-blind, the wolf caught his breath, while Reynard gave him the chance. Reynard announced that the wolf's life was in his hands, and if he came before the fox, knelt, and begged for forgiveness, the fox would spare him. This, of course, was meant to throw the wolf into a rage, to make him careless. Reynard wanted him attacking relentlessly and thoughtlessly, and it worked. The wolf charged at Reynard, who slipped from the bony paws and hit Isengrim in the face again with his urine-soaked tail. It was super effective, and he repeated it 10 times, landing bonus bites wherever he could. Of course, Reynard also took scratches and scrapes, which were much more painful and deep without his fur. Unfortunately for the fox, with dust clinging to him and blood running down his bare skin, the grease began to wear off, and his tail began to dry out. It wasn't long before the wolf landed a blow that actually pinned Reynard. The wolf knew he couldn't do much damage with his paws, and so he was going to upgrade to his teeth. It was in that half moment of transition that Reynard found his window and attacked with his back legs. Reynard's back legs tore Isengrim's fur from the wolf's eyes to his ears, but the left paw had a deeper catch. It hooked into the eye. Isengrim screamed and staggered backwards, paw on his face. When he uncovered his face, the crowd gasped as it looked on his dangling eye. Reynard struggled to his feet, but his last attack on Isengrim had been a step too far. The wolf was now back on top of the fox, teeth gripping the fox's arm, threatening to tear it off and kill the little guy if the fox didn't yield immediately. "Stop!" Reynard yelled. "Please!" He begged the wolf not to kill him. If the wolf let him go, he would give everything he had to the creature. He would be the creature's servant forever. Together, they would be unstoppable. The fox with his intelligence, and the wolf with his brawn. Besides, the wolf saw how many animals came to his aid the last time he talked to the king. All those animals would treat Isengrim like royalty. But if Isengrim killed Reynard, all those animals would come for him. It might not be today, it might not be tomorrow, but someday they would avenge Reynard's death. Of course, that could all be avoided if Isengrim let him live now. The wolf blinked an eye. Isengrim said he gave the fox that chance. Reynard could surrender. He didn't have to die. That was his choice, the one that the wolf just said. Really, did the fox think he was stupid? Reynard thought about it and nodded. Yeah, he did. Because all that was just a ploy to get the wolf distracted enough for Reynard to snake one hand down, way down, between the wolf's legs. He grabbed the wolf there and twisted. Isengrim yelped, and Reynard wrenched his arm free from the wolf's mouth. Reynard darted out from beneath the wolf, ready to keep fighting. But, in tears and screaming, Isengrim passed out from the pain. Seeing as the fight was still on, and his enemy was incapacitated, Reynard leapt on top of the wolf and punched, bit, and slammed him into the ground until the lion called the fight's judges and told them to pull the fox off the wolf. Everyone rushed to Reynard, even those that had sided with the wolf. The fight was over. He had won. In the end, Reynard let the wolf live. Not executing your unconscious opponent was the honorable thing to do. He guessed. Also, the crowd got to him too quickly for him to do it. Oh well, there would probably be a next time. The next day, the lion who was a king made his final ruling on Reynard's case. He announced that it was obvious that God wanted Reynard to live, if the fox swore in the Bible, and then entered a fight with a wolf. With a huge sigh, the king declared that Reynard would have another chance. A big one. He invited Reynard to sit on his council and to be a judge. The king charged all the fox's friends with keeping him in line. And he said that the fox was obviously brilliant. He just needed to channel that brilliance toward good things. And now he had the chance. Reynard thanked the lion who was a king, promising that he wouldn't let him down. The king said he hoped the fox wouldn't. Oh, and he would start tomorrow. Amazingly, the fox had entered the city earlier in the week, an accused criminal, and left the most powerful lord in the kingdom, all thanks to his words, and a lot of grease, and a urine-soaked tail, and some unsportsmanlike conduct, with a rowdy crowd celebrating as they arrived at Wicked Hole. The fox parted ways with his ape attorney and Grimbart the badger, his truest friends. He said goodbye to everyone, and as the crowd cleared, he heard a gentle cooing behind him. Reynard spun around to see a young pigeon in the shadow of the door. The bird just wanted to tell Reynard how much he admired him. It was great to see not a bear or a wolf become the king's right-hand animal, but a fox. The fox thanked the bird, and as the bird started flapping to take flight, the fox stopped him. How would he like to come in for dinner with Reynard and the family? Nearly speechless, the bird stammered. He was honored. Reynard grinned and followed the bird into the darkness of Wicked Hole. That's where we'll end our Reynard stories. I've told all the ones I've found so far, but we may come back to them sometime if people don't mind a completely amoral and sociopathic fox. Reynard is seen as sort of a hero of the peasant class, standing up and using the complex legal system of the lords, kings, and priests against them, and always coming out on top, despite seemingly insurmountable odds. The legal system provided a way for Reynard to get out of trouble. He could always talk his way out. If it was up to who was the strongest, he would have been dead a long time ago. The stronger animals were always at a disadvantage, because it often came down to their word against Reynard's. And when it came to talking, Reynard could turn even their own words against them. From an English major perspective, I think it's cool just how many unreliable narrators we get out of the story. Everyone is a liar in some way. I mean, we never really learn the truth of a lot of these stories. And at some point, it becomes irrelevant what's true. And the only thing that matters is how well someone can tell a story or spin circumstances. It is definitely a pessimistic view of our interactions with each other, but from a storytelling perspective, it's pretty interesting. All right, that's it for this week. Instead of other stuff, I'm just going to ask you, again, to please go vote for Myths and Legends in the Webbies. We're up against some really steep competition in our category, and I made it super easy. You can just go to vote.mythpodcast.com or click on the link in the show notes. And just thank you so much for listening. We wouldn't be anywhere without you. The creature this week is the Dragwa from Albanian mythology. If you're thinking, hey, the person next to me might be a semi-human creature born with the instinctive drive to hunt and kill a demon by the name of Kolshidra. If they're listening, you might want to get them to cover their ears. A Dragwa is formed, apparently, from couples whose ancestors haven't committed adultery for 3 consecutive generations. That honestly seems like a really low bar, and that there should be a lot more Dragwas walking around. But I guess all of our ancestors have some explaining to do. Anyway, they can fulfill their innate drives to fight an extremely lethal dragon and die that way, but there's also another way they can die. They have 2 to 4 invisible wings tucked underneath their armpits, and if someone says to them, "May your arms wither," it will cause their immediate death. And I hope the person next to you was still covering their ears, but if not, I'm sorry about your loss. A fringe benefit, though, of having a Dragwa die right next to you is that they have a heart of gold. Literally. Their heart is solid gold and full of jewels. If they don't die from listening to a podcast, they will wage a centuries-long battle against Kolshidra, a dragon storm demon with 9 heads, pendulous breasts, and the producer of both poisonous milk and poisonous urine. It will bring storms, flooding, and natural disasters. An all-around just terrible creature. The Dragwa doesn't really care about the storms, but it will come to our aid if Kolshidra zeroes in on a human to eat. With the aid of its magical felt hat, the Dragwa will attack Kolshidra with cudgels, houses, lances, plows, stones, uprooted trees, and yokes. If this sounds like it would be awesome to see, unfortunately, they fight in secret, and a Dragwa throwing a house or a tree at Kolshidra will just look like a lightning strike, which are cool in their own right, but not 2 dragons throwing houses at each other cool. So, oh well. That's it for this week. The theme song is by the band Broke for Free, and the Creature of the Week music is by Steve Combs. There are links to even more music in the show notes, and today's episode was written by me, Jason Weiser, and edited by Carissa Weiser. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.